Welcome to my presentation about recognizing unhealthy relationships. Before we begin, I would like to start with saying that my presentation mainly focuses on relationships in the LGBT community rather than the entire LGBTQIA+ community. This is because a lot of the information that I found only focused on the LGBT community. The LGBT community in general has been ignored in sex education and healthy relationship curriculum. This, combined with heterosexism and other factors, result in this community suffering more from escaping unhealthy relationships. With the QIA+ community having even fewer resources and information available, they likely suffer even more, which is why more work needs to be done to implement educational curriculum and create resources to help. Regardless of your gender or sexuality, unhealthy relationships exist everywhere. Let's start off with talking about abuse. What is abuse? Abuse happens when partners use psychological or physical ways to get and keep control over the other partner. They may do it to express feelings, to get their own way, or to prevent the abused partner from leaving the relationship. Abused partners often change their own behavior to meet the abusive partner's demands, hoping the abuse will stop. Abuse can result in physical, sexual, emotional, or financial harm, and can affect the abused partner's public or private life. When people experience abuse, sometimes they think it will just happen once. In reality, abuse often happens over the span of months or years. If the abuse continues, it usually becomes more frequent and more severe. It's also important to remember that even if the actions seem minor or only happen a few times, it is still abuse. Abusive behaviors are always a choice, no matter what the abuser's background or experience is. No one has the right to abuse someone else, and no one deserves to be abused. Abuse may come in many forms, but abusers' tactics are usually intended to undermine the partner and lower the partner's sense of personal strength and value. The most visible abuse tactics may be physical, but less visible forms of abuse can be just as destructive. The Domestic Abuse Hotline defines tactics of abuse as actions taken to exert power and control over victims. The three categories of abuse include psychological, physical, and sexual abuse. Psychological abuse can cause emotional pain and injury. The abusive partner uses emotional or mental weapons rather than physical assaults on the abused person. Physical abuse include any activity that can cause physical pain or injury. Sexual abuse causes both emotional and physical harm. It's important to note that abused LGBT partners usually experience more than one type of abuse. For example, emotional abuse accompanies almost all other forms of abuse or intimidation tactics. Some important things to keep in mind are that partner abuse can occur in all segments of the LGBTQIA+ community, regardless of gender, masculine or feminine traits, physical appearance, or stature. Partner abuse is also not mutual abuse. When abuse happens, one partner is controlling the other through abuse. So far, most of what we have talked about can be applied to all relationships, whether they are LGBT or not. But now, how is LGBT partner abuse different from abuse in non-LGBT relationships? To help me explain this, I have borrowed a list from roomtobesafe.org, which is an anti-violence organization specifically for LGBTQ folk. For one, living in a homophobic, transphobic, sexist, and heterosexist society creates a different context for the abuse, including gender dynamics in the relationship. Racism creates a distinctive context of LGBTQ people of color who experience abuse in relationships, and an entirely different context in transgender people of color. LGBTQ people who have been abused, including men, may have more difficulty finding useful support than heterosexual women do. The myth prevails that LGBTQ relationship abuse is mutual. Few assume that abuse in non-LGBTQ relationships is mutual. Utilizing existing services such as police reporting or partner abuse programs is similar to coming out and is a major life decision. Within the LGBTQ community, support may not exist. To talk about LGBTQ abuse reinforces the homophobic myth that LGBTQ people are sick or that LGBTQ relationships are unhealthy. LGBTQ survivors may know few other LGBTQ people, Leaving an abuser could mean increased isolation. LGBTQ people who know a lot of other LGBTQ people may risk losing friends if they disclose about the abuse. Some LGBTQ friends may believe an abuser and not a survivor. This could also lead to increased isolation. Trans men and trans women may have problems finding partners of their desired sexual orientation. Their partners also need to be accepting of their gender. This will make the pool of potential partners smaller. The LGBTQ community may feel small. News of the abuse can become public knowledge. This may be true for trans people who are sensationalized by the press. The abusive partner can use blackmail to hold the survivor in the relationship. Being outed at work or to parents can be more threatening than the abuse. In trans relationships, the threat of obstruction of transitions may be abused. There is little clear language to talk about rape in LGBTQ relationships. Because people don't have language to discuss rape in LGBTQ relationships, studies sometimes indicate that rape or sexual abuse is less likely to occur in the context of partner abuse for LGBTQ people. In reality, rates of sexual assault in LGBTQ relationships are similar rates of sexual assault in non-LGBTQ relationships. Having a lack of language could also be a reason why consistent statistics regarding LGBT rape or sexual abuse have been hard for me to find. In roomtobesafe.org, they suggest that rates of sexual assault in LGBT community are similar to non-LGBT relationships. However, the CDC says that lesbian, gay, and bisexual people experience sexual violence at similar or higher rates than straight people, and that around half of transgender people and bisexual women will experience sexual violence at some point in their lifetimes. A lot of the times, we picture straight, cisgender people saying homophobic, transphobic, or heterosexist comments. The reality is that anyone can use these strategies as weapons of control. For example, an LGBT couple can out or threaten to out their partners. Here are some other examples of ways people can use these tactics as weapons of control. They can tell their partners that help is not available to them because the police and the justice system are homophobic or transphobic. They can tell their partners that no one will believe them because lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, trans-identified, two-spirited, or queer people do not sexually assault or abuse their lovers. They can say that their partners deserve abuse because they are LGBT. This form of abuse is often the result of the abusive partner's own homophobia or transphobia. They can tell their partners that they are not real LGBT people because they have opposite-sex friends, have children, prefer certain sexual practices, or used to have intimate relations with the opposite sex. They can try to convince a partner that the abusive behavior is normal and that the abused partner does not understand LGBT relationships. Because of heterosexist stereotypes about LGBT relationships, abusive partners can give the idea that the violence is mutual or that the abused partner consents to the abuse. That increases the partner's power and control. Men can tell LGBT partners that abusive behavior is not domestic violence, but an expression of masculinity. Here, I have included a picture of the LGBT Power and Control Wheel, which is a tool that can help LGBT folk find patterns of abusive behaviors used to maintain control over someone. Luckily, there is no need to reinvent the wheel to figure out what tactics of abuse are in play. The LGBT Power and Control Wheel was based off the Power and Control Wheel, which was designed for battered women in heterosexual relationships. This wheel was developed to help women understand the ways in which a batterer is able to get their partners to submit to them. Now, modifications have been made to make it more LGBT friendly. The LGBT Power and Control Wheel has power and control at its center because that is the source of motivation for all of the behaviors that are in the rest of the wheel. Everything else in the wheel are behaviors, tactics, or tools the perpetrator can use to try to maintain and control someone else. The wheel can help people recognize patterns of abusive behavior and understand how these strategies work in a system to give their partner or partners control. It is usually not a good idea to tell someone that you think they are being abused. By using the wheel, it can also give victims control over what they want to name their experiences. Someone who uses this wheel may use it to help them decide whether or not their experiences feel like abuse to them. To use the wheel, people can read the examples in the pie pieces to see if any of them apply to their relationships. For example, if someone notices that their partner is controlling who they talk to, they may feel that their partner is using isolation as a tactic of control. They may also be experiencing physical violence if they do not listen, which could be another tactic of control. As you move from the middle of the wheel to the outside, the tactics of control become more obvious to others. While some abuse can seem more obvious than others, it doesn't mean one person's experiences are not as bad as someone else's. There's no right or wrong way to use the wheel. For some people, they may not feel that a behavior was abusive to them, while others may feel differently. Recognizing and coming to terms with the fact that abuse is happening and that it's not okay is the first step to getting help. The two outermost layers show phobias, isms, and types of violence. These tactics of control can play a role in how behaviors appear and how people may choose to react to situations. For example, in relationships where someone comes home from work and finds out that their partner used their credit card, most people would probably sit down with their partner and talk about it. People who have experienced physical violence or have been threatened with it may be more hesitant with saying anything because they are scared something will happen. Today, we have heard about ways people can use tactics of control to be abusive in a relationship. Now, I would like to share a scenario and have you use the power and control wheel to try and distinguish if a behavior is abusive. And if it is, what tactic of control was used? Skylar and Frank met at a dorm party at UW-Oshkosh their freshman year. For a while, they had been great friends, but eventually their friendship turned into something more. While Frank and Skylar had met each other's parents, Frank and Skylar had never told them that they had become romantically involved. One day, they decided that they wanted to host a dinner party to come out to their parents. However, the day before the dinner, Frank told Skylar that he was not ready to come out to his parents. While Skylar said that it was fine and they proceeded to have a normal dinner instead, Skylar has refused to talk to Frank for 3 days. Is there any behavior in this scenario that seems unhealthy? What, if any, tactics of control were used? This would be a good time to pause the video to think about your answers. Some behavior that may be unhealthy is that Skylar has refused to talk to Frank for 3 days. There could also be a lack of communication or transparency about what they are both okay with doing. One tactic of control that could have been used is emotional abuse, because giving someone the silent treatment for a long time could come off as playing mind games with someone and making them feel guilty about their decision to not come out. Sometimes walking away from a situation to cool down can be a great way to avoid saying something that you may later regret, or use it to compile their thoughts when they don't know how to express themselves. Other times, people can use the silent treatment as a tool for exerting power over someone else. Frank has the right to decide when he wants to come out to Skylar, and Skylar should respect that, even if it is the day before the dinner. Not talking to someone for 3 days is over the top, and Frank is likely trying to manipulate Skylar into feeling guilty and coming out.